So first of all, hello everybody. My name is Chris Fuller, and I am the project manager at the Edge Online. Dylan, who is our guest today, is a former student of ours and a current student at NYU. So he's directly experienced some of the coronavirus-related issues, you can say, and we'll be talking about that over the course of the day. I'll let him answer any of your questions. So if you have any questions, just post them in the chat, and he will answer them. He's also fully fluent in Mandarin and Cantonese. So if you have a question, then you can better word it in either of those. Please feel free to post it in that as well. All right, so I'm going to start off. Dylan, please introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll get into answering any questions, and I have some questions here for you myself.
Alrighty, thank you very much, Chris. I am Dylan. My name is Dylan Yen. I am a freshman at NYU. I was a former Edge admissions consulting student. And as Chris said, please feel free to write any comments for us. They will show up here, and we'll try to answer them as much as we can. And 如果大家而家係睇緊呢個 video 嘅話，你哋如果擺緊啲 comment 咧，我哋都可以睇到嘅。So, without further ado, shall we begin?
Yeah. All right. Let's go. As you know, as you know firsthand, this virus has caused a lot of headaches for students. So what I really, my first question for you is related to your experience when the announcement first hit. So what was your school doing, you say, to prepare for the coronavirus prior to this first announcement? So before it happened, you knew there was a condition, right? But what was the school telling students?
The school was actually, we have a campus. The NYU has a campus in Shanghai, as well as around the world, Paris, London, Berlin, Buenos Aires, and so forth. So we are a very global campus. However, as the coronavirus hit in Wuhan, the Ministry of Education in China obviously told a lot of the schools to shut down. And so our Shanghai campus was actually one of the first ones to shut down and go completely remote. And we knew of this very early on when we first came back from Christmas break. However, the university didn't really take certain steps to mitigate this virus until about late February, when they banned all non-essential university travel. What that means is that they banned all of the spring break trips, the school-sponsored spring break trips, research trips, especially to China, and among other things. However, the university wasn't actually prepared per se until Harvard started shutting their school down on early March. I believe it's March 4th or 5th, that they began to shut the school down, and NYU was under immense pressure from both state and local government to shut down. And initially, we were given an email that said, hey, by the way, since next week was spring break, they told us to kind of get ready to maybe take a week of online classes before you come back, or so on and so forth. And on Friday, the day before most of us left for spring break, we were told that we might be able to return in April. And it wasn't until maybe last Wednesday or Thursday that we received word that we were going to go completely virtual. And by that time, most students and families were already either out of the country or in the US somewhere, California, Nevada, that they weren't able to obviously go back and get their stuff. And NYU actually went ahead and just said, we're shutting this, you're shutting the dormitories down, you have 24 hours to move out.
Okay.
And under those circumstances, I believe that the university was not ready at all. They were blindsided by this outbreak, even though being a global university, they knew what was going on in Shanghai, but they were blindsided by the fact that it was moving so quickly in the US.
Okay. So you don't think that they had any reactionary plan in place for it?
No, all of their contingency planning looked like it was done in the last 24 hours prior to the announcements.
Does not sound good. Okay. So I know we talked a little bit about this before, but how was the reaction among the students when they gave you this short notice? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that you were going to go on spring break anyway, right?
Correct.
So all they really did was extend your spring break, but then they gave you that 24-hour notice, right?
Yes, they did.
And so how was sort of the student reaction among your friends and other students or even professors about this particular shift?
Outrage.
Outrage.
Absolute outrage, especially among the professors were kind of mad because they were given basically a 1 week notice to say, you're shifting all your classes online, deal with it. That's what the administration basically said. For us, I can tell you that there are about 3 pending lawsuits that I know of against the NYU administration. So suffice to say, the student body hasn't really taken this very well.
Yeah. And I know you've been greatly impacted by the classes itself. So you said it took a week, they had a week to go online, right?
Correct.
So both teachers and students, correct? And so during that week, what were the students expected to do? So when you were between the week of saying, hey, you have 24 hours to get out of here and the first classes, what were students expected to do? And in particular, what about international students?
So students were expected, we were given that ultimatum during spring break. Most of the local students, like stateside students, had already gone home because of the previous guidance that we would, kind of have an extended spring break, if you will. However, for the international students, especially for those who couldn't really travel home at a moment's notice, it's been really hard for them. And the school kind of just shrugged and just said, deal with it.
Wow. Now, I know we had talked a little bit before about this as well, but the visa issues. You said you were telling me that people were having their visas canceled. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Correct. So under State Department guidelines, you have to have 2 things as an international student in the US. You have to have your F1 visa, and you have to have something called an I-20. The F1 visa is obviously a visa that will allow you to be in the US as a student and a student only. The I-20, which is also another integral part of your admission to the US, states that your accommodation, your status here, and among other things. The I-20 has a paper form and also a digital form. The university that is sponsoring your F1 visa has to keep your I-20 current. They have to keep it current in order to prove that you are a student of that university and therefore have legal status in the US. However, the I-20s require that your physical presence be in the US in order to be valid. Obviously, with this being in place and with students with nowhere to go except being evicted, they had no choice. the university had no choice but to continue the students' so-called status in the U.S., therefore invalidating their I-20s and making sure that basically guaranteeing them no status in the US, and therefore they would be there illegally as a person without I-20 status. This also extended to people who were trying to stay in the States because they were evicted. You know, even if they would rent a house, maybe rent an apartment, share an apartment with a relative, they had no more legal status in the US purely because their I-20s had been canceled. And on the I-20, one of the most important things of the I-20 is that you have something called a residency. The university, especially for first years, provides that residency option, and it's listed very clearly on the I-20 that is the place that you are going to live. Once that place is invalid, the university has to update that I-20. However, because the university has gone completely online in this case, there is no way that they can legally update that I-20 to say that you are still, like, there's still a need for you to be in the US, because there isn't.
Okay. So how long were students given to leave the country then?
Once the I-20s were invalidated, which they were on March, I believe March 18th or March 19th, you had 48 hours to leave the country, because you no longer had, under Department of Homeland Security rules and under the Patriot Act, you no longer have legal status in the US when your I-20 is revoked.
Okay, so that sounds like just a perfect case or perfect scenario for horror stories
Correct.
among international students. Now, what percentage of the student population do you think is foreign or international?
So we have a question currently about the I-20. So to respond to your question about the I-20, yes, it is for all 4 years. However, the university needs to keep your status current with the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection. However, the I-20, once it's not current with DHS and CHP, it's invalidated, and you no longer have status in the US. Chris, you're speaking about the fact that what's a population of NYU, especially NYU.
International students. So how many people do you think were impacted by this this instantaneous shutdown of visas?
I would say NYU has one of the largest populations of international students in the US of any private university. It has over, I think, about 25% of its student population is international. And with 25,000 undergraduate students, that's about 5,000 international kids. So that's potentially 5,000 or 5,000 and more international kids that were forcibly displaced. And for a lot of those international kids, one of the issues that they encountered was that some of them weren't able to go home, or some of them had to be subject to mandatory quarantines. I know of a lot of my Chinese compatriots who missed the deadline to go back to China, or come back. Actually, sorry, a lot of my Hong Kong friends that missed the deadline. I believe it was last Wednesday when the deadline was put in place that you had a mandatory 14-day quarantine in Hong Kong. A lot of them who missed the deadline actually have to stay home for 14 days. And even worse, for my other compatriots across the border in mainland China, they have to be quarantined not at home, but in a state quarantine facility. So for them, life is not great.
I see. So a lot of them are like, it's 5,000 people, a lot of them trapped. That just sounds like a nightmare scenario and being told to leave for 48 hours or in many cases being quarantined. Okay, let's shift a bit to the post impact then. So we have the story now of what's happened to you pre-impact and when they actually gave you the Exodus announcement. So let's how about classes? So they had a week to prepare, you said.
Correct.
And how have they, how have they done? How have they reacted to the changing of classes? So compare them before the epidemic to after the epidemic, or after the Exodus, I should say.
Sure. So a lot of our classes, all of our classes have now shifted to Zoom, an online platform. And the fact that, and all of them are subject to the professor's interpretation of what these online classes are. Some of them have, taken this in stride and tried to make it as interactive as possible. Others have kind of thrown in the towel and said, here's some reading, do it. That's class. And especially for those teachers or professors who are tenured faculty who have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. And, they struggled to upload a file to Gmail, let alone have live classes on a platform that they have never used before and had only a week to prepare. This goes especially for laboratory classes. You can't exactly learn from a video of an acid-base titration in chemistry without doing it yourself. Especially in a lot of lab settings, it kind of makes the class a little bit impossible. And one of the other drawbacks of online classes, especially after all of us, especially particularly international students, have been dispersed all around the world. For example, I have classes at 9 a.m. through 3 p.m. or sometimes 5 p.m. Eastern time. What does that mean here? It means that I have to log on in real time at 3 a.m. Hong Kong time to get on these classes. And for some of the professors, I don't know if they realize that, or maybe they do realize, but they're not sure what to do with the fact that a lot of us particularly don't live in a certain time zone, and therefore it's very difficult for us in order to participate in that class. And with a lot of classes with participation grades of about 25 to 30% of your grade, not participating in that class, especially the small group discussion classes where real-time face-to-face discussion is crucial, it makes it really difficult for us, especially as international students. And Joanne asks, would this impact will I continue to study at NYU? I don't think that NYU is at fault. And the answer is yes, I think I will. Purely because I don't think NYU is at major fault here. They didn't have the contingency plans, obviously, but for a lot of other universities too, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, all of them have kind of been thrown into disarray because of this situation. And especially I think Harvard Harvard's debacle was made very, very public in the fact that they kicked all of their students out and basically evicted them too.
Yep, yeah, Harvard was the first, if I remember right, and
Correct.
you guys followed right after.
Correct. Along with the slew, I believe the Ivy League most of the Ivy League followed. So did, I think I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe Michigan, I believe all the UC shut down as well. And I don't think there's a university in the United States currently that is not meeting virtually.
I don't, the fact I'm even here in Georgia where I'm at, all of the schools have been shut down for a couple of weeks at least, even the small ones. And so, Okay, so I mean, you mentioned a few interesting things there. So just to continue this what classes are like, have the teachers been able to provide any extra support for you during this time?
Um, a a select few have. They've been really, but the ones that are flexible, that are, mostly younger professors, they are a little more flexible with their materials or when they plan to meet with us. For example, one of my professors is having two class sessions instead of a one lecture that's discussion lecture that's an hour and 15 minutes long. It's broken into 45-minute chunks. Um, and he's hosting two of these 45-minute chunks each time on the each days that we have a class. For example, one at the usual time at 3:30 a.m. In the morning, and one of them at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is 8 p.m. here for us. That way, all of us will be able to participate in, well, kind of participate in a more meaningful way, rather than not.
Okay. Now, how about any of your tests, like for classes? Have you had
Uh,
any online tests? Because you said you're using Zoom, right? But Zoom doesn't allow for testing so much.
So NYU has something called has a learning management system, or an LMS, that it built itself. And in that LMS, there is an option to provide for tests and quizzes. And in that regard, uh, you have to turn your webcam on during your test and quiz, and you have to, you know, but you have to be proctored in sort of a way.
Do they have an online proctor for it?
Yeah. But however, one of the drawbacks of that system is that obviously it makes it very easy, even with the webcam and all of the software that requires that kind of proctors you. It still heavily relies on students' integrity and honesty. And a result of that, well, a lack of that anyway, that honesty results in um, the entirety of your class, the integrity of your class, and the integrity of your exams being tossed out the window. And that did happen. For example, my midterm, one of my midterms that was hosted online, actually had such a bad, so many people cheated that the curve was so high. In order to get a good grade, I believe, in order to get an A in that midterm, you had to have a 99 in order to get an
Oh,
A. And the B, I believe the the cutoff for a B or a B minus was a 91. So it makes things a lot harder, especially if the midterm hadn't been adapted for more, um, useful or more online, or adapted to suit online purposes. But that's just one bad apple. And a couple of other professors who are a little more open, a little more flexible, actually basically made us do research papers and write papers for our midterms because they didn't trust the fact
that
that we
student.
could
Yeah.
police ourselves.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, I did my hybrid MBA, and it was the same. We would never have multiple choice tests.
Yes.
It was always papers because nobody trusted, even graduate students. And so, okay. So, back in line with the focus of the virus and the impact, we were talking just a few minutes before this about one of your professors. Have you, with NYU being the epicenter of the U.S. the coronavirus in the U.S., have you known anybody personally impacted? And again, you just mentioned your professor before when we were chatting.
Correct.
Can you go
So
into that a little bit and how
um,
that's impacted you?
one of my professors, actually, I learned yesterday, last night, was actually tested positive for the coronavirus and is currently in the ER, and he has some difficulty breathing. So as a result, classes for that class are suspended indefinitely. until that professor can come back to health again. Knock on wood. How else has it impacted me personally? Well, I'm in Hong Kong. I'm not in New York. I am currently self-isolating for 14 days, as the Hong Kong government suggested, and will continue to do so until my 14 days are up. And I'm also affected by the fact that, I think I spoke about this before, that I have to stay awake until 3:30 in the morning doing classes. Perfect example, I have a class today at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I have to stay awake for that until from 2 to 3:30 in the morning, listening to a lecture about economics, which riveting.
Yeah, well, undergraduate economics is, yeah. I'm an econ guy, so I love econ, but even I was like, wow, undergraduate economics, no.
I can imagine. How else has it? Well, speaking of which, a lot of us, after we were given that ultimatum to go home, were in a mad scramble for already lessened Cathay Pacific flights that would get home, because not only as a Hong Kong student, obviously I would fly Cathay Pacific from JFK to Hong Kong, as it was one of the only options that that's usually available. However, not only did I have to compete with a bunch of other Hong Kong students and businessmen who were vying to get out of New York, which was quickly becoming the center of the outbreak in the US, I also had to compete with mainland Chinese students who had to transit through Hong Kong in order to get to mainland China to get home. And as a result, I think I booked around 16 flights, staggered. And I had bookings on Cathay. I had bookings through on British Airways through London. I had Air Canada through Vancouver, JAL through Alaska and Tokyo, and EVA Air through Taipei.
They have direct flights, don't they?
I'm sorry?
They have direct flights, don't they, from New York to Hong Kong?
They do. And so in addition to the direct flights that I had booked, I also had all of those other options, just in case I didn't manage to get on the flight. And one of the funny tidbits that I will share with the public is that on my flight, there was actually a few people who had bought out their entire row, and the row in front of them and the row behind them on the flight. They bought them out in cash at the counter.
That's almost like hoarding, isn't it? It's like toilet paper, but for high class.
Yes, it is. And I felt like I was at the beginning of Breaking Bad or Apocalypse Now, and about half the plane was in bunny suits, full PPE, head to toe hazmat suits.
Really?
With a lot of students wearing two N95 masks, one on top of each other. With one N95 mask, I struggled to breathe. I don't even know how these people did it. And a lot of them actually didn't even go to the bathroom. They didn't eat or go to the bathroom for the entire 16-hour journey from JFK to Hong Kong.
So you ended up with a direct flight?
Correct.
Okay.
I did manage to get on that direct flight in the end.
Okay. Wow. There's lots to talk about with this, but our time now is running short. So I'm going to talk. First of all, let's open it up to any questions, any additional questions. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about your experience as well with our platform, and since you've also worked with Zoom and with us, right, just to sort of highlight what you've seen. But let's open it up to questions first.
Sure. Let's give I'll give them maybe 1 or 2 minutes for questions. If anybody wants to ask a question, please go ahead and do it in the comment section. We will, The Facebook Live platform has about a 2-minute delay. Before we upload, before it gets uploaded to Facebook itself and before you see it. So it takes a while.
For the questions to appear?
Yes, the questions are, and the questions appear on the Facebook, and we're monitoring that right now. Oh, thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Joanne, for, I am coping as well as, well, we can be in this situation. And I hope you are too. Do we have any other questions?
Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about your experiences with online classes, and then we will call it a day.
Sure.
So you've been with both us at the Edge Tutors, and you've done Zoom with NYU. What do you think are the main differences between your experience?
So my experience wise, Edge Tutors is more suited for one-on-one discussions, especially as part of um, its tools allow a teacher who's teaching a one-on-one student a lot better access than Zoom would, for example. Zoom is great for, a lecture class with 300 people. And it has tools in order to, like, raising hands. I'm sure for a lot of the kids that are watching this, or the parents too, who are doing work from home now, they're very familiar with Zoom and the way it works. It's just a video conferencing platform that happens to have a whiteboard built in and screen share, and for presentations. It's more of something for a large classroom setting, and the Edge Tutors is more for a one-on-one platform. I think it does better for a one-on-one platform, but that's just my experience.
Okay.
We have a question that comes in, actually. Somebody said, how do they make up for the lab classes? Honestly, I don't know. We don't know. We've been told that they will figure out a way for us to make up the lab classes, and in the event we don't, they get canceled. We still get credit for the classes, but we may have to take some things again, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I imagine the lab classes are quite difficult. I mean, it's just, as you mentioned before, it's impossible to have a lab when you're not physically present.
Correct. Especially for NYU has one of the, I think, one of the few prestigious acting schools, especially NYU Tisch, the Tisch School of the Arts. And for them, they have basically been told that their classes are, they're not to expect like any normal kind of representation for classes, and especially for actors, it's a very physical, intimate performance or intimate education experience that requires that in-person experience in order to feed off another actor or feed off another person. We call it, you know, and especially with actors who are trying to perform performances, a lot of their exams are performance-based. Like their midterm is a musical, and how they perform on the musical determines their grade. And obviously you can't teleport people to a virtual stage, at least not yet anyway.
Yeah.
And there's another question. Are there any HK students who did not come back to HK are still in NY? Where are they now? Yes, there are students that are still in New York. They are, and some of them are in, a lot of parents, well, some parents have flown over there to, like, I've heard of maybe 2 stories. A couple people have rented apartments, especially kids with green cards or US citizens. They are there. They're there in New York, or maybe somewhere on the Eastern Seaboard. Some of them were in Virginia, North Carolina. Some of them are up in Boston. but there are some kids that have not come back. And have any more questions?
Well, we'll answer them as they come through. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the Edge to try and mitigate, help the students who are going there, who are going to the US. Your experience is greatly helpful for this. And again, as an Edge Tutors student, that's been great. So one of the things that, for those who don't know, one of the things that we developed at the Edge about 2.5 years ago was our own platform called the Edge Tutors. And as Dylan has said, he actually was one of our pioneering students for it. He was one of the test subjects when we were developing it, one of the first cases. And one of our focuses for this, and we're using it now for all of our classes, was to basically have a completely enclosed system that provides all of the necessary tools for teachers and students to have, at first, one-on-one classes. So it enables us to do a better job as a teacher, and I'm a teacher myself, but it enables us to do a better job of providing that same lesson quality, that same lesson content to our students without having to go through Zoom, which is a great platform. We're using Zoom for this Facebook Live. It has its purposes. So one of the things that I want to hear your experience with this. What was the most useful tool to you when you were using that with our platform?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What was the most useful tool to you? Was it the whiteboard, the text editor, the file uploading, the lesson logs?
I think one of the most useful tools for me, at least, was the something that Zoom that obviously doesn't have is the live text editor, because I was a student who obviously needed to share writing, share text that I had written with some of my teachers. And so the live text editor, where someone could come in and kind of edit it Google Docs style, was very helpful.
Okay. And yeah, that was one of the main features we actually wanted to make sure that it had, so that students could then also go back and look at it in future lessons. They can go back to the previous lesson, or a new teacher can come in and say, hey, your previous teacher was working on this. How does that differ with what you're using now at NYU?
At NYU, we are using Zoom, same platform that we're currently using now to broadcast. Zoom is a lot more useful in like something that's not as interactive. For example, large classes with 30 people where the teacher or the professor is lecturing, that it has features such as breakout rooms that will, that kind of let students go in with a TA into a kind of like a virtual breakout room, so to speak, to converse about a topic. Or for like a breakout, for example, like during a period where we're kind of working on our essays or working on our problem sets, the teacher will, Zoom allows the teacher to kind of break out, like kind of have a separate private meeting with a group of students or a student in particular. And Zoom has its perks for that.
But does it handle like text editors or shared lesson logs, things like that?
That is one of the features that the Edge Tutors has that Zoom doesn't have. And that is actually one of the features that I miss most about the Edge Tutors now in Zoom, that even in those private one-on-one settings, there isn't a dedicated text editor where I can just paste things. I have to email a Google Doc to a professor to share.
And then it's harder for them to pick it up afterward. So there's pros. It sounds like, I mean, there's pros and there's cons to different levels. Good. So yeah, I guess I will end this with one last question. And then, of course, if anybody else has any questions, let's say, what do you think students can do to better prepare themselves as we move on? You know, what would you do different going forward, knowing what's happened to you during this crisis?
First, I would have if I was to have to evict all the kids due to a state mandate, which is what happened. I would do it in a most definitive way possible. I wouldn't stagger the announcements out, and kind of change plans every 24 hours. And if I were university administration, I would put a contingency plan in place for when this type of thing happens, rather than waiting for this to happen and kind of sitting on their hands and going as the crow flies. But I'm sure a lot of universities have learned this lesson, learned this painful lesson, as I'm sure. And my hope is that they will have contingency plans in place to further mitigate this type of disaster.
What about from a parent or student's point of view?
From a parents or students point of view, expect the unexpected. That's what I'm gonna leave the students and the parents that are expect the unexpected, and always have a contingency plan in place, because sometimes you can't trust the people in power to do the right thing. Case in point, Donald Trump. However, you know, you kind of go as the, I shouldn't say go as the crow flies, but do what you think is right, especially, and for the students especially, keep in constant contact with your parents, please. A lot of kids actually, the first time that they talked to their parents that semester was, "Mom, I need to come home, and I need to come home now, and I need $5,000 to come home."
Not a good conversation for most people. That sounds like a pretty terrible conversation.
Correct.
So, okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Dylan. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, this video will be available, and you can post them in the comments section, either now or over the next week or so, and we will answer them. If it's a question related to how we're doing things at the Edge, or a question for Dylan related to what he's experienced within as a student at a top tier U.S. university during this, at the epicenter of this outbreak in the U.S. Please feel free to add that to the comments section. Yeah, thank you again for your time, Dylan.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, Chris.
Have a good night. Enjoy your classes.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody.